So appreciate the invite from MxD. Really appreciate the opportunity to be out here, talk to you all. Look forward to some good questions. I'm going to try and give some framing points. I think this is kind of an obvious question, but hopefully I can shed some light on what we're doing, the challenges and opportunities that we see, and where we're going. So while the question may seem obvious, we can't take it for granted. People assume that the outcomes in Bernardino's presentation on what happened in World War II, or if you read the book Freedom Forge, will just happen again, and it doesn't work like that. We are not in the same world that we were in during World War II, or even the Cold War, or even at the end of the Cold War. But we can and must sustain the defense industrial base and expand it. We don't have the luxury of time. We have determined adversaries that have grown and expanded their capability and capacity, and we have to do the same to match their will and determination to stay in the fight. Our DIB is a bedrock upon which our global strength and influence are built upon. Without it, we can't effectively deter those threats, project power, or defend our interests. It provides the weapon, equipment, and technology necessary for our military to maintain readiness and respond to crises around the world. A robust DIB signals to potential adversaries that the U.S. has the capacity and resolve to defend itself and its allies, deterring aggression. And a strategy without capacity to build at speed and scale is a plan on paper. MxD and places like the rest of the manufacturing institutes exist to accelerate digital adoption, secure factories, and skill the workforce, the exact levers that the DIB needs to address. So before I give some additional details, I'm going to give one more historical example and some background on my organization. So what you see here are a kind of a period in time at Air Force Plant 4. This is a public-private partnership in Fort Worth, Texas. As was in the original presentation, some of the companies were mentioned here. So I'll kind of walk from left to right. I'm a military historian by education, so this is the happy part of the speech for me. So same bomber that was talked about earlier, the B-24, was also built at Fort Worth. The plant was established in 1941, owned by the Air Force, still owned by the Air Force, but has changed hands and built different aircraft that have sustained our global power from that point on through to today. So changed hands when Consolidated merged with Vultee in 1943. That became Convair, built the B-58. Convair became General Dynamics, which built the F-111 and then the F-16, and then 93 Lockheed acquired General Dynamics and continued to build F-16, transition to F-35. That just shows the existing and enduring capability and capacity of just one side of the defense and industrial base. So I'm not saying that that is the best and brightest example. It's just a great one just because they're recognizable systems that we know and use today. Same could be said by other shipyards, ground equipment, other aircraft manufacturers, but it's a great test to how we have evolved over time. Unfortunately, the rest of the industrial base has not maintained the same pace and scale like this one facility. And I'll cover that in a little bit more detail. A little bit on my organization. So, as mentioned, I'm the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of War for Industrial Base Resilience. I work in the Office of Industrial Base Policy, cover broad areas that focus on the growth, maintenance, production, and support for the defense industrial base. There are several other offices in my organization that cover other things like our economic offensive and defensive capabilities, our Office of Small Business, international cooperation, and industry engagement. So if you're talking industrial base, certainly within the Office of the Secretary of War, you're likely coming to me or one of my counterparts' offices. Within the broader office, I have two organizations that I oversee. So as mentioned, I have one shop that covers our strategy, our analytical capabilities, supply chain data and sector analysis, wargaming, and then reviews across all critical sectors to identify our industrial challenges and opportunities. That is then fed into my other organization that I oversee, which is essentially the money. So we oversee the Defense Production Act Title III for the Department of War, and then a separate fund called the Industrial Base Fund, which uses a funding appropriation called Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment. Both cover different things. They have different authorities. There's different timelines, but the intent is the same: expand, grow, sustain, and maintain the defense industrial base. We have several consortium associated with each of those funds, so you can see them at the bottom, the Defense Industrial Base Consortium, and then IBAS has something called through our Army, the Cornerstone OTA. They're both OTAs. They are free to join. We have periodic calls for white papers and proposals. Cornerstone is always open for proposals. DPA is on cycles targeting key gaps. So if you're not a member, if your organization or your industry would like to be one, I highly recommend you join. Again, it's free. Welcome all participation. And we do review, and those papers are the foundation for how we actually go target and close industrial gaps. Other thing that we have is DPA Title I, so that's the prioritization. So there's 3 remaining extant statutes in the Defense Production Act. 2 of them are in our office. The third one, Title VII's got some other stuff that different shops in our office cover. There's some more arcane statutes beyond CFIUS, which is actively used daily. But Title I is the prioritization. So how do we give out a DX or a DO rating to critical defense systems, or how do we do priority allocations when we have a key shortfall that we're trying to target and address? All of those are enabled by where we are with this administration. So they are hyper-focused on reindustrialization, and this includes and especially focuses on the defense industrial base. So our current capacity is recognized by the administration as needing expansion, and we are supporting a series of executive orders and presidential actions. What you see on the screen is just those that my office has some level of either ownership or support for. As you can go to whitehouse.gov and read the very long list of executive orders that are already out there. This is not an exclusive list. These are just the ones that we are directly leading and focusing on. There are other areas that touch as well, but when these were put out, they were meant and are driving action. We spend countless hours burning down the different actions and deliverables for all these executive orders that are tied directly to what we're trying to do here and build out and grow the defense industrial base. And that defense industrial base is not just the big names and the companies that we were thinking of and mentioning earlier. So so what is the defense industrial base? As was mentioned in the kickoff speech, it's not just the big primes, even though they have all the dollars. It's the 59,000, give or take or so, smaller sub-tier suppliers that are across the board supporting the defense industrial base. They make components, widgets, all types of systems, some for defense only, some for across the board commercial, but we need to track and map and support all of them and grow, and I'll get into why we need to grow. We also have supporting sectors, not just for the industrial base, the companies themselves, but those that are making the COTS parts, the commercial off-the-shelf parts that go into our weapon systems. The industries and the power plants, the water, the infrastructure that is supporting these companies, those are also all critical to make and sustain our industrial base. And then we have all the other related organizations. So we have the manufacturing institutes like MxD, the OIB, the organic industrial base that was mentioned, where I come from before this job, academia, our FFRDCs, supporting partners and allies who are part of our industrial base, not just as consumers of our products, but often suppliers of components, weapon systems, or at the more elemental level. And then we have labs, warfare centers, and a host. So where you snap the chalk line on what includes the DIB is an open question, but needless to say, it's large, but not as large as it needs to be. Without the DIB, we're not able to lead on the world stage. Our DIB supports readiness by producing and sustaining our combat capability. Less sexy than new weapons, sustainment is a critical aspect of our DIB. Whether producing parts from our commercial partners or utilizing our organic industrial base or commercial allies to sustain and repair our components. Majority of dollars that we'll ever spend on a weapon system, give or take, depending on what we're talking about, 70% of them are going to be in sustainment. So the same vendors are usually supporting not just the new production, but also the repair too. So it's something that again, everyone likes to focus on the acquisition side of A&S where I'm from, but the sustainment side is important and critical. And you go to war with the systems that you have, and where you need to grow is both in acquisition and in sustainment. All of these provide a deterrence factor. So knowing that we can build and employ the most capable weapon systems in the world helps deter our adversaries from taking action today against us, our partners, and our allies. And the DIB is crucial to that. Was kind of a part of the video earlier, but I'll kind of run because we've had some changing flavors in the industrial base. So World War II, producibility and maintainability were the key. You saw an example of the Sherman tanks being built. We could build one Sherman for every 7 Tigers that went out the door from Germany. And so the quantities that we were able to both produce and then maintain and supply were how we helped win that war. Liberty ships, we built a Liberty ship, fell from to 42 to 45 days to build a new ship from scratch, including one that was built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. These are not miracles. It took hard work, it took dedication, it took partnering across the government and the industry. There were choices that was made quickly across the government industry and labs that were aligned to these bottlenecks, and we face different technologies today. What was mentioned earlier was shifting from wooden canvas in aircraft in World War I to aluminum and steel. In World War II, we are orders of magnitude more complex with the aircraft just alone that we design and fly today. We need to find the choke points, replace it, and then make time to build out the base now, because the time to act is now. Another historical example I'll give you, so naval historian by education. Every aircraft carrier, battleship, heavy and light cruiser that won the war in the Pacific, served in the Atlantic, was ordered before the war. Every single last one of them. So while we were able to ramp out submarines, transport ships, the Higgins boats that were built, the smaller things that were the great enablers of the war, the major capital ships were all ordered before the war. And so we know that we have a potential adversary that has a potential timeline. That is what drives me every day. That is what drives my team every day. That is why we're planning and ordering, because the time to act is now. It's not going to be when the balloon goes up. As you can see from the flow chart, we went from a robust industrial base out of World War II, and we kind of actually turned that off quite a bit in the drawdown to Korea. When the Korea War kicked off, we found that we were not able to ramp like we thought we were just from 5 years ago. And so that's actually where the Defense Production Act, that's in the news a lot, actually comes from. It came from authorities that were necessary to stimulate and drive the defense industrial base. We maintained that level of focus throughout the Cold War. But in the post-Cold War environment, through the peace dividend, we made some choices that we continue to have reverberations for today on the defense industrial base. So what do we need to do for the defense industrial base? We have a number of things that are required. So what I mentioned before, getting ready for whenever a potential adversary action will be, it's not just the size, it's also the readiness of the industrial base. We have several decades of consolidation and inertia to overcome. We took advantage of being in a unipolar world, and our industry shrunk. If we think that Ukraine, Israel, and the other conflicts that we see right now are models for where we're going to be, we need to have an industrial base that is able to scale, bring in non-defense partners right now, and then be there for the enduring conflict and be there able to ramp. All of these challenges need to be addressed. So the things that are listed on the slide. So just in time, again, I come from the sustainment world, that doesn't work when the missiles are flying. That doesn't help you get that part west of Wake Island when all of your supply chains are under attack. The reduction in our domestic non-industrial defensive base is also concerning, as we have less to flex and adapt. The Singer example that was used earlier, yes, there will be those things, but we just have a much smaller base to go draw from. And so that's some of the efforts that my office and then related efforts across the department are leading. How do we map out not just our defense industrial base, which is itself its own challenge, but then all of the related and the non-defense industrial base partners, so that we know what we have capabilities today to go scale. One of my teammates likes to use the example, if we wanted to make more missiles when the balloon goes up, we should have more TV manufacturers, because the same technology that goes into making the LEDs that are in your screen translates pretty well to go making optics for your missiles and your sensors. Doesn't mean it's hopeless. We are growing. We're pushing on all fronts to expand our capability and capacity. And we need to expand our capability and surge capacity and bring on new entrants and flex non-defense into supporting the DIB. And again, that's not a challenge to our large primes. This is in addition to bolster and support. Yes, we saw the example of Willow Grove and multiple factories building B-24s. There weren't 10 factories building B-24s. There were a couple that were supported by thousands of suppliers constantly providing them parts. So we need to ramp and scale for the systems that we have, and then bring on the new entrants to build mass back into our capabilities. Great example of consolidation. Sorry, it's an eye chart, and it's also a little bit out of date, but it hasn't gotten any better. So on the left, you could see the mass consolidation that led to just five, not all of them are on there, obviously, of the primes that we have today. I'll note that chart ends at 2001. So that's already 24 years out of date, and there's been that much more consolidation. Consolidation in and of itself is not a bad thing. But we need to know what the capacity and scale are for those larger corporations to be able to scale, because the sub-tier suppliers have also consolidated. And we get left with too many sole and single source suppliers for one part and component and widget that if a bad day happens and a fire breaks out in the factory, or, hey, it's just time to sell, I'm done, and I don't have a kid to turn it over to, and I don't have someone that is in the company, that can have a detrimental effect on certainly any industry, but the defense industry, because we have too many of those single source, sole source suppliers that touch multiple weapon systems. And we're trying to map out and try and target those for our investments to grow that capability and capacity. Shipbuilding's another challenge too. You can see that on the smaller chart on the right. Just the number of ships, the number of tonnage, the number of different yards that are building has drastically consolidated. And again, using the example that I mentioned before, we don't have the time to build that back once the war starts. We have an adversary who is building at scale and continuing to increase that scale. Pivoting back to the OIB, so this is a chart I built for my old job, but so this shows every decade or so until you get to about the mid-90s, the consolidation in our organic ship repair facilities. So at height of Vietnam War in 1970, we still had 9 public shipyards. That has continued to drop and go down as time has gone on. Now, the fleet has shrunk, and so we don't have the same size of the fleet that we did in Vietnam or even that we did in the 80s, but it hasn't dropped to nothing either. And so I know we'll hear, you get a presentation on the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard later. We are struggling with capacity. Shipyards are different. Ships are different, to beat a long since dead horse. Unlike a plane or a tank or a vehicle or something that you could roll into a different hangar to go work on, dry dock capacity matters. Slip capacity matters. The other things that are on that chart show the decline in our floaters and our repair ships too. And so we have just inherently less industrial capacity to do repairs. Some of those yards actually, up until the 70s, were still actually building submarines. That's all gone. Now they're all doing repair. But again, our OIB, even as diminished as this particular picture shows, across the Army and the Air Force and the Marine Corps, still has significant actual and then latent capability and capacity. The OIB, from my old office, I'll kind of put on my sustainment hat for a second, is kind of your organization for inefficiency. And I mean that politely, and I mean that proudly too. There are some things that it's not a money question that you cannot get industry to build just because the scale, the quantity, the mass, or the profit of those things, whatever they might be, it's just not a good economic decision. The OIB can do that. We have inherent production capability and capacity, sometimes underutilized, sometimes maxed out in the case of the Navy in terms of shipyards. So I ask that when you're thinking about where you're looking for your companies or your scaling or what you're doing, not just from a repair capability, especially on the Army side for the arsenals, there is fantastic capability to produce and produce at scale. So overarching industrial preparedness. So we need to have that map turn darker. So that map is a couple years old, but it's basically by dollars, where are our dollar investments going across the country? It needs to be done smartly. It's not just dollars out the door. How are we actually tying that to real products? We need to drive expansion, support preparedness, and that starts with our incumbents, as I was mentioning. Then we expand from our current system to go bring on our new entrants. We need the mass and volume that we're seeing in Ukraine and Israel and other conflicts to be able to sustain ourselves in war. We'll use a lot of exquisite systems right off the bat, and then we'll be left with an adversary that is still ready to keep fighting. And so we need to be able to prepare and scale and be able to ramp for that as well. Our investments need to be done smartly. I know I've said that, but what does that actually mean? So if we are putting dollars or resources into a particular node in a supply chain, every dollar that goes out the door, we are focusing on what is the feeding and receiving aspect of that, that node. So if there's a widget manufacturer, where is the material coming to support that production of that widget? Who is taking that widget and putting that on a weapon system? Is there a handshake, an agreement, an offtake? Does it have private equity or venture capital or another fund from across the board? Is a military service on board with using that too? I'm not going to go make I'll just pick an example, a microelectronics investment if I don't know that the Air Force or Navy or pick a service isn't standing up say, yeah, yay, verily, that is what I need. That is going into not just this program, but these other 3 programs because they're part of the plan. Those are the questions that we are being asked, and so I share that when you come look for resourcing from some of the funds, at least that I oversee, those are the questions that we will be asking you because we need to answer those. We can't make isolated investments that are the right thing to do on paper, but aren't tied to a feeding and receiving mechanism. And then all of those points are kind of fed by my other bullets. So while I oversee just about every industrial sector from an analytical standpoint and a resourcing standpoint, I find myself spending an inordinate amount of time on critical minerals. And you can kind of see why. Next chart will show you a better kind of visual on why. So part of the pun, but at the most elemental level, you can't have a missile without a mineral. And as you can see from kinetics that are listed here, these are all just examples. It's not an exhaustive end-to-end list, but across the periodic table, we need all of these minerals, all of these materials to make our weapon systems. We build high-tech, war-winning, amazing weapon systems that depend on having critical minerals and materials to make them work. And unless we have a replacement capability that equals the same level of requirements that the military service put out for that, we're not going to swap it. We can't just take something out and substitute for it. And so what we're left with is decisions over the last 20, 30 years by both commercial and government to allow other folks around the world to dominate this supply chain. China dominates much of the mineral supply chain, and it's done that for a reason. They're the cheaper option. And you can be the cheaper option when you don't care about people. You saw a couple of the executive orders that were listed earlier on critical minerals. That is and will continue to be a focus because we have a lot of work to do. We used to be one of the dominant players globally on critical minerals. We are blessed with a wealth of minerals and materials that are in our ground. We also have great partners and allies that have some of them too. But China has taken over much of the processing, the metallization, the beneficiation, all the other things to make a raw material into a finished product. This chart is U.S. Geological Survey data. We call it the tornado slide. That shows it going from top down, where are our imports coming from? It's not to say that we don't have capability or capacity, but just listing them. And so it shows where we are dependent on it. And while we have a lot in our own ground and our partners have a lot in their own ground, geography matters. At the mineral level, this stuff is where it is in the earth. But from a processing standpoint and all the other aspects of the supply chain, we need to make those investments because we cannot have our adversaries in control of our supply chains. COVID was mentioned earlier. It's a great example. It matters for minerals and munitions too. And so we have a lot of work to do. We also have a lot of support here. And so there's going to be a lot of work and activity. We've already seen from across the government. We work this at an interagency level so that we are not causing fragmentation and that we are working together to make investments here. Because if we don't get this right, nothing else matters. You could have 95% of all critical minerals or materials that you need for a weapon system, and it doesn't matter if you don't have those other 5%, whatever that might be. So we have a lot of work to do. We also have a lot of support for this. I'll kind of wrap up real quick. We do national security with our DIB. It is critical. It is essential. I don't need to tell anyone here. And we're taking action to expand that capability and capacity. And the time to invest, as mentioned, is now. So be happy for any questions. Thanks.
That was great. So thank you, first and foremost. If there was one or two things that you have your mind set on improving for the DIB, what would it be? Even if it's kind of magic wand, what are the things that need to change to really ramp up to the levels that you're suggesting?
So, I mean, I will start and end with minerals. If we don't get that right, it doesn't matter. Like if we are missing key materials and minerals, we can't make the weapon systems that we need. The other piece I'll touch on is kind of the sole source and single source. We need to know, and we are working on this, we need to do better. Industry needs to do better at knowing your supply chain and knowing where your risks are, knowing what your sole source suppliers are, so that when they have that one bad day, or it's just it's the get out of business day, that we're not reacting to that, we're not panicking on that. And so we are trying to make investments to identify what those are that touch multiple weapon systems so we could build that capability and capacity. I mentioned those two because they touch everything. If we don't get those kind of things right, it's going to be a challenge.
Thank you so much for the talk. I'm actually a senior in college, and my cohort and I are trying to get involved, and we're trying to get this younger generation involved. What are the best ways? I mean, we're building a startup that's working very closely with the DLA, DARPA, and whatnot. But what are other ways that this younger generation can really get involved in expanding the defense industrial base?
No, thanks for the question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. So something you mentioned and that I usually mention, and so I forgot, workforce matters. We can talk all that we want about 3D printing and advanced manufacturing, but the people matter. If we scale and we don't have the workforce, not just to hire, but retain, then it's not going to matter. And so we need to do, and there is a lot of talk and discussion at the interagency executive level on how do we, one, broadcast and hire and entertain the youth that is coming out, that's coming up much more tech savvy than either myself or anyone else in previous generations were, and show that this is good jobs, well-paying jobs, steady work that's not going away. And so that is a major effort. To your direct question, we have a number of different programs. I'd be happy to talk to you offline, whether it's through our small business office. I know my R&E counterparts work on the cyber side. So there is a number of different ways to plug in. And then some of it's just finding what is that niche capability. It's not just I want to go do the DIB and be part of that. What does that actually mean? What are you good at? What is your skill set? And what types of weapon systems does that plug in with? And so some of that's events like these to make yourself knowledgeable and known to the broader community that you have a different potential or capability that someone else might be looking for.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's been very revealing. I have a two-part question. What are you doing to secure the defense industrial base, and what role is Katie Arrington playing in those policies?
So I'm not going to talk on personalities or specific companies, but we are doing a lot to secure, because it's a great question. Just from a cyber or force protection or other capability, it doesn't matter if you're already letting the adversary into your supply chain. So we are turning both the DFAR, the FAR, our policies, our regs upside down. One for speed, but then two for security too. So how are we actually rolling out protection? So I won't name names. I was in a facility that we went to go look at a key capability. I had just been asking questions on cybersecurity and how they are managing and protecting, and they talked about their air gapped, and they have all of this other cyber protections. And then we go out onto the floor, and there's actually Chinese techs installing equipment from China in their facility. They couldn't have come the day before when we weren't there. So there's talking the talk, and then there's walking the walk. And so another example is, so my sister office controls the CFIUS process, and so that's going to be countering foreign influence, and I always get the acronym wrong. Yeah, thank you very much. But how do we stop someone from like China or another adversary buying out a capability? And that's a key aspect of it as well too. So not just purchasing the company, but we've also expanded that to kind of the real estate. So how do we stop them from buying the farm next to a base or a defense company?
This is in a similar area, but a lot of these raw materials are from a variety of countries, some of which we're in good terms with, some we're not so good. Are we doing much to foster adequate relationships so that we can keep importing or possibly stockpiling these important materials that could become blocked if it came to a conflict with the main sources?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is, I'll give an example. Just last week, I was literally out here as well for a G7 Critical Minerals Summit, where we talked through those specific examples of how do we work with partners and allies. I mentioned geography matters at the mining level. this material is where it is in the world. And so we have a lot here. Some of that's dormant. Some of that went out because China priced us out of the market. And not just our defense industry, but our industry writ large went to where the cheap material was coming from for economic reasons. And so the investments that we need to keep that in mind, and how do we not just bring that back on, but sustain it. That is a partner-driven consideration. So whether it's the source of those materials or working together to counteract Chinese influence in the minerals market, our partners and allies are critical to that. Many of the things that we are short on can be found with partners and allies, and so that is key part of our discussions that we're working with across the interagency and internationally.
First, very eye-opening, so thank you for that part on the weapons and systems. Is there like a sister office or under your office the support systems like health, food supply, logistics, etc., in case anything has to be deployed and then has to be supported?
So the Defense Logistics Agency does much of all those things that you just mentioned. So we work hand in glove with DLA on critical minerals. So I have 2 folks on my team that run the policy for the National Defense Stockpile. They do that in hand in glove with the Defense Logistics Agency, who actually manages the stockpile. We have similar programs that have worked with DLA on some of those other areas that you mentioned. I know our Department of Health Affairs covers down that. We are primarily focused on the weapons system and the supporting infrastructure side. It's not to say that there aren't efforts there, but DHA and DLA cover more through that. And I think you mentioned food, and that's some of the commissary system as well, too. Ma'am?
So getting maybe a few steps above the critical minerals and just raw materials, what manufacturing processes, technologies, operations are of particular focus right now?
I would come back to 3D printing and advanced manufacturing. So how can we build at scale? So while all the things that I mentioned on workforce are still valid, where we could take time out of the process, where we could take waste, scrap, and reuse out of the process, that is of high importance. We also are focused on the flip side of things like castings and forgings. There's only going to be so much things that you want to build additively or using other advanced manufacturing things, whether just size or scale or anything else. There's some things that you're going to want to build traditionally either for cost or timeliness or elsewhere. So those are 2 key areas, but they run the gamut. If we're building a ship, a plane, a missile, we need all of the different capabilities and scale, but whatever allows us to move faster and build at the quantities that we need has our direct attention. Sir? Oh, I'm sorry.
So if I had to guess, I would say that World War III would look like a cyber war. Are you including cybersecurity companies in the DIB now, or what is the future of that?
So cyber is an inherent part of how we operate and fight, and we need to protect. I don't know if I would go all the way, just my personal opinion, I won't speak for the department, that it will be a cyber war. If we see what's happened in Ukraine and Russia, it's pretty kinetic. Israel and Iran and whatever else is going on in the Middle East, cyber is just a tool in the quiver. It is not the tool, the war-winning tool. Will it have effect? Can it cause casualties? Absolutely. But everything that we need to do needs to be thinking about not just cyber hardening, because there's only, again, I'm not a cyber expert, so my expertise only goes so far. There's only so much that we could do to protect. At some point, you have to be building, designing, and planning to operate in a comms-denied, cyber-denied environment. And so how are we training and operating to fight knowing that our systems are going to be hacked, knowing that they're going to be attacked, and what is our backup plans for that?
And so I was wondering, is there now a supply chain concern about giving a lot of these large companies full root access to the government and almost able to hold data hostage? Or are there plans to now start having the government be able to host those services themselves so that they can't be held hostage in any way and kind of diversify the supply chain there?
So I'll use an example from my time as a sustainer. Most sustainment data is unclassified. It's shipping, it's moving materials, it's moving parts, it's ordering. And so again, kind of the question that I answered previously, how are we operating in an environment to protect that? So the same kind of thought and mindset goes into how we manage our supply chains too. We're trying to do this collectively and in partnership with industry. It's not one or the other, it's both. And again, not a cyber expert, but that is inherently part of those discussions on how to protect our data. And then operating under the assumption that you're never going to be able to protect anything, so how do you plan and operate for when you are hacked?
So planning that all connections are will be disconnected at some point and still try to operate.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks. Sir, yeah, you've been.
Excellent presentation. Just a question on dual sourcing, the elephant in the room. We used to have dual sourcing for everything. Now we're a lot of single sourcing. Are there any strong initiatives from the DIB to start bringing back dual sourcing and balancing commercial with defense so that these companies can stand up?
So I'd say that that's inherent in everything I talked about. So it depends on what you want to do is define dual sourcing. Is that buying the exact same thing from two companies? Not necessarily. If one can scale with all the support and supply to it, I'd rather have a second thing that's in that capability or category, just so I'm not dependent on one through adverse or just accidental action as well too. But at the, as mentioned, at the 7th, 8th, 9-tier supplier level, that's where I'm concerned at sole sourcing, just because we have a hard time seeing it, being very open and honest, and I'll tell you that industry has a very hard time seeing it as well too. And so they don't know often where all their materials coming from because they're ordering from their major subs and they're ordering from their 2nd or 3rd tier. They're not seeing the 7th and 8th tier down just because it's not visible to them and they haven't asked. And so those are what we need to target and are trying to burn through in key areas so that we can be less reactive when issues pop up. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.